Did you know that day 62 of This Is Not Advice is a special day because we have, first of all, a special guest who is my friend, Lucas Bewald, from his basement electronics shop, his garage electronics shop at home. That is very cool. We showed my daughter some cool robots sometime. And we're going to do today's format a little bit differently, which is instead of doing one question, Min, who is helping us out, has helped us arrange. Luke is just going to ask as many questions as he has, and we'll keep going. And you can feel free to ask questions on Twitter, well, in the chat or whatever, on Periscope or LinkedIn. But one thing I just want to say before we start, Lucas, is one of the things I've really liked about all of our interactions over the years is I feel like it's very clear. There are many things that I come to you to ask about, and there's several things you come to me to ask about. And I really like the fact that both of us can, like, I can be like, okay, I know that Luke is the only guy who's going to know that. So now I'm excited to try some things on for size. Let's do it. I might ask you some questions too.
All right. Well, fair enough. That's so sweet of you to say. I feel like for the last decade, when I have a sticky issue that I can't talk to anyone about, I always come to you. So I wanted to bring, more of those, but those ones I feel like have to kind of be private. But I have kind of two themes of questions I think that I kind of gravitated towards. So, one is sort of like HR questions, because I feel like you're so smart about like being like ethical and being responsible. I feel like a lot of kind of issues come up in that. I want to give you some kind of hard ones where like, what would you do?
I like
and then
ones.
I also have a bunch of questions around what it's like to be a VC, and also like what VCs are thinking when I pitch them. So
I will happily, those ones I can give advice on in the sense that I'm answering for myself. And just so folks know, the context that Lucas is speaking from now is he's got a developer tools company called Weights and Biases that helps people manage their models, their predictive models. And you can correct me if you would describe it differently than that. And before that started what is now Figure 8, was originally Crowdflower to actually help us accumulate some of this data we use for our A's and our I's. So, all right, hit me, Lucas.
All right. I'm gonna start with some VC ones, because this is like I'm in a way more interested in these, right? So, one of the things that I always kind of struggle with is rejecting people, and I assume as a VC you kind of reject people all day long, and I assume that as a VC a lot of times you're actually rejecting people because of something intrinsic about them that's probably hard for them to change. And I know that you like to give people feedback, and you like to be helpful, and you like to be honest. So what do you tell people? How much do you tell people when the real reason you're not investing is because they're like annoying or they seem irresponsible? Sure. What do you do?
So the first thing I try to do is protect myself, if possible. You can't always do this, from even getting in the situation. So like something that not a lot of founders know is before I take a first meeting with a founder, I've often, if not always, already done my backdoor reference checks on them, at least some lightweight version of it. So like there's a chance, the chance goes down that something horrible is happening. And then I warn them that I'm very blunt, because I've learned how to like advertise. I call it hanging the beware of dog sign. But then the toughest version of this that I ever had, which I'll just go to that one, is two founders who pitched us, and we really wanted to invest except for one of the two founders who was like, yeah. And it's like, well, and the other one was the one who was the CEO, but the founder who we didn't like as much was the one who kept talking to us because he was the business development guy. He was the guy who wore a suit. And it was like, okay. And how do you share that with them? And in that case, to be honest, I didn't, because I didn't know how to say it. I felt like my knowledge about them was so small compared to the importance of the relationship they'd put in each other that I didn't want to risk destabilizing them over a first impression, basically. But I waited 6 months. And then after 6 months, I saw a LinkedIn notification that one of those founders had left, the one that we didn't like had left. And then I called the first founder. I was like, hey, I had this dilemma. What would I do? And he's like, yeah, I don't know if you could have found a way to tell me. So we talked it through. I didn't quite have a solution, but I managed to get honest later. But in the moment, the first thing that I do is I acknowledge that we don't really know the reasons we believe things. Like if I don't want to invest in something, I don't know my own mind. I don't know what it is. But okay, let's assume that it's because I find this founder just annoying. I will say things like, look, the chemistry is really important to me of having somebody I'd really like to serve. And inevitably in any pitch situation, there's going to be conflict. There's going to be disagreements over things, and conflict is fine. I mean, you and I have had it before. It's like, see something one way, see something another way. And so there's almost always therefore a basis when I tell somebody there's a chemistry issue for them to conclude whatever they may want to conclude, because we've had, disagreements and something like that. So that's what I try to do. Can I always do it? I think the vast majority of the time, but it's like the principle is find an honest way to do it that feels socially appropriate to the situation. And most important, pay attention to the fact that You don't know that much. And so like, I'll tell you the rejections I hate giving, which I try to never give, is when, VCs, and as a founder, I used to get this all the time from VCs. They'd be like, well, blah, blah, blah about the market, blah, blah, blah. And you'd know better. You'd be like, no, you're just an idiot. You're just wrong. And so instead, we try to focus on things like our ability to judge the blank market, the medical devices market or something like that. We don't feel confident enough in our ability to have a point of view on it, as opposed to, I don't believe that you have any good, whatever. So it's about being aware of what you can know and trying to be honest to it. Long answer to a simple question.
Great answer. And a good segue to my next question. I'm legitimately excited to hear your answer on this. So, what are like the dumb things that founders do in pitches that they could clean up? Like there must be stuff where you're just like, God, like, why do they do that?
Yeah, it happens actually a lot less. It used to happen a lot more back when, like, I think this is a great resource, but like Venture Hacks had a bunch of stuff on how to pitch VCs. And the biggest issue was uniformity. The biggest issue I see is, like, starting a company, you're taking so many risks. And so a really important question is, when do you default to snap to grid versus when do you choose to do something your own? And it's a hard one because as often as possible, you should snap to grid because you're doing so many crazy, risky things that, like, taking risk around, like, well, I'm going to incorporate my company in some state that's non-standard just because I feel like it. It's like, why would you do that? But there is a level of uniformity in pitches. It's like, if I see another, I want to raise X for 18 to 24 months and Y that amount. And it's like, well, here's what I'll achieve in 18 to 24 months. And then I say, you're going to have to start fundraising 6 to 9 months before you run out of money. So you won't actually be able to achieve all that. And then it's like their whole worldview crumbles because they didn't think through that part. And so it's defaulting to grid on stuff without understanding the reason why, just because you think that's what the VC wants to hear. And so, that often happens around things like, what are you going to spend the money on? Like, basically any one of the standard, how do you think about your competitors? People will give this answer that they understand is the answer that they're supposed to give. And there is a language. So there are definitely things you're supposed to say, but mastery of that language is saying the things you're supposed to say in a way that's truthful to you.
Okay, so great segue into the question that's always baffled me. That's the title of this this Q&A. What am I supposed to put on a market size slide?
Don't have one. That's my answer. Here's my reason. Now, this is for me. I think this could work for other VCs too. Here's my reason. I don't think anybody ever got persuaded on market size, ever. Either you walk in the room and you're like, Flexport, you're serving the logistics market. And it's like so insanely big that, like, yeah, my jaw could drop at just how big it is, but like, I'm not going to pass on market size unless I'm a moron. Or you have a business like Uber where some investors passed in the beginning because they didn't think the black car market was that big. And so, usually market size, the productive conversation about market size is almost never about the math of TAM and multiplying if I get 1%. It's about adjacencies. It's about, here's roughly how valuable this first thing we're doing could be. And if it's clear that that's not valuable enough, which does happen a lot. We have a company right now in our portfolio that is doing something broadly in the operational logistics space, and they're going after one market first and then expanding. If it's not enough, then what you need is a credible tale about expansion. And by the way, Facebook had it, college social network. That's an okay category. Facebook's a pretty good one, and so that's the way I recommend doing it. And I would do it by talking about the sequence of what you plan to do, as opposed to a calculation about market size. By the way, if the VC is like, where's your market size slide? They may be doing the same rote, dumb stuff that founders repeat, which that's, by the way, the reason founders often repeat stuff is because VCs ask them to, in which case, would I make it and have it in the appendix? Yeah, I probably would, but I wouldn't put a whole lot of time and effort into doing the math. That's my thought.
I'm sure a lot of people are thanking you right now.
Or a lot of VCs are like that asshole. I'm just curious. For you, you're doing developer tools. So how did you think about it? I don't even remember. How did you think? You're also raising after having successfully started a company, so it's a little different, maybe a little less deck dependent. But how did you think about it?
Well, this comes up for me because at every stage of my last company, I would ask the investors to help me with the deck, for the next round, figuring that
they know what they're doing.
Yeah, they know what they're doing. And what's that? They don't.
If you want advice on how to raise money, ask a founder. Investors don't know how to raise money. They're on the receiving end, not the giving end. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, totally. But it's like it's like how to get product advice, talking to customers is a good idea. I do think it's wise to ask your existing investors.
Interviewing them about their reactions as opposed to asking them. It's exactly the same thing as interviewing a customer about a product. You don't do what they tell you to do. You listen for what their needs are.
Right. But that one's always baffled me because, at every stage, like they would say, yeah, you got to make like a market size slide and be like, hey, what do you want here? And I feel like the only thing that's really helped me is I mean, I feel like with my new company, I have a very clear view on who our target market is. And that's like just helpful for like kind of like outbounding. You know what I mean? That's like yeah. So like, I feel like just having like a list of customers that you want to target is like useful for you internally, but it's never going to like add up to the size that I feel like folks want to see on a
Yeah, I mean, like if you ask me, look, I've decided, Roy, it's nice that you think that, but I'm going to make one. So how should I make it? The thing I'd say is it has to be made in a way that is appropriate to your business model. If you're selling big enterprise customers, it's about logos and target contract sizes and a bottom up. And if you're selling a SaaS product that's swipe a credit card, well, then it's like comparables to other ones and what might they compare it to and early price testing and how many people. So you can do math. Don't overthink it. And if you do the math, definitely do it in a way that's appropriate to the business that you're in.
Right.
All right, what's next?
All right, here's one that's always baffled me. So, I feel like VCs are always kind of obsessed with like defensibility. Yet when I look at like enterprise SaaS, these companies just don't seem very defensible to me. And I'm not sure why. Like I look at like all the SaaS products that we buy, and I don't really want to name them because I don't want to knock them, but like think like any SaaS product. Why don't companies exist that go in and just like say, I'm going to copy like X public SaaS company and just the pitch is like we're half the price?
Yeah. So, okay. So you're asking a bunch of questions there. One is around, are SaaS businesses defensible, or in what way are they? And how do you answer that in the fundraising process? The other is, what about kind of call it near clones of existing businesses? First of all, in a sense, let's do that one first. Because in a sense, all of cloud is a near clone of enterprise software. It's the same thing, but it works slightly faster and you don't need to buy it this way and you can log in from anywhere and blah, blah, blah. The one about being slightly less expensive, I think, is a tough one because in general, unless that dramatically increases the size of the market, it has a pretty capped ceiling. And so the companies that are like, we just do X only less expensive, tend not to work as well. I'll tell you a variation of it that I love is the stuff that customers need but don't think they need, which is things that work faster. At one point, one of my gimmicks is like, I think of gimmick ideas for venture capital funds. And one of them is faster ventures, which is we invest in things that already exist, but you make a version that's slightly more performant, where like the page loads a little faster. And that could work. It could totally work, but it's not the kind of thing that people think about. So then when it comes to defensibility, I think that there are, first of all, it's in a class of questions that I call the you're dead questions. And the you're dead questions are like, by the time somebody starts asking about it, you might already be dead. Like they might just be asking stuff. And so don't invest lots of time in chasing them. Sort of the what will you do if Google competes with you question is a classic example of a you're dead question. But let's assume it's the first question off their, out of their mouth, then you're probably not dead yet. Or else that was stupid of them to take the meeting. Or you dressed very inappropriately or something like that. Then what I would do is I would try to articulate it in terms of why you can protect your value for a long time, meaning things like once customers use us, they won't switch, reasoning by example to other similar categories. My version, by the way, we tend not to ask the like, how is it defensible question? But we do ask a variant of it, which is, why do you have an increasing return to scale? As you get bigger, why does your product get better for the next customer? Because most wildly successful venture businesses have that mechanic. Or we ask, and this is only relevant in some businesses, what will you do about a fast clone? Because lots of businesses, they don't die, but they end up having their wings clipped because of a fast clone.
Interesting.
And it's a more specific question than what is your moat? I have read Michael Porter, and I understand there is such a thing as a castle analogy for a business. I don't know.
All right. So this is more of a softball question, but I think it's something everyone's encountered, but I think you probably encounter it more than most, right? So what do you do if like you have a pitch scheduled for an hour and you're like 5 minutes in and you're not going to invest? Do you try to weasel out of the meeting politely? And if
yes,
so, how?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So again, the first step is do your work beforehand. I said this to a founder today, I didn't weasel out of the meeting. We took the full time and it was worth it. But I said, the worst thing that can happen to me is I ask a question in the first 2 minutes that I could have asked over email that is fatal to my belief in investing in the business. I might be wrong, but like, it's a thing that I hold so deeply, or like a focus area. Like, we don't invest in financial services. If I miss that something's a financial service and they're in my office, it's gonna be a super awkward conversation. It's part of why, by the way, we publish all this stuff about what we do on the internet is so that we avoid the risk of somebody sitting down and being like, you mean you're not a video game investor? It's like, no, I'm not. That's it. Of course, it often happens. And I try to put the power back in the other person's hands. I try to say something like, look, I don't think I'm going to be able to get over this issue because here's how you could get me over it. And it's often something they can't do then. If you want, we can certainly continue talking, but I really respect, that your time is really precious. And I genuinely believe that even though there's a paradox here, which is founders oftentimes it's like struggle to get on a VC's calendar because we're like all inundated with meetings, but nonetheless, the founder's time is actually much more precious because if I'm not doing something, things are still getting built. If you're not doing something, software isn't getting made, people are not getting better at their jobs, blah, blah, blah. So I really want to not waste the founder's time. And the founder are in the best position to judge that, not me, especially once they've already like traveled to my office or whatever.
Mm-hmm. I will say this has only happened to me once, and I've probably unsuccessfly pitched hundreds of VCs at this point.
You're a master unsuccessful pitcher. Like
I was very appreciative, even though it wasn't delivered very nicely.
How did they handle it?
What's that?
How did they handle it, and how did you receive it?
Oh, it was so this is Aiden Senkut, and it was like delivered like incredibly rudely at the time, or it felt that way. I mean, because you put your heart into a pitch, and it was like very abrupt. Just like this seems like a bad idea. I was like, what?
Yeah, right. I mean, and the reasons are pretty critical too. I mean, I'll tell you about a story I had like that in a half a second. But yeah, that's tough stuff. And so wait, so what did he say, and how did you? Tell the story.
Oh, well, what happened was he was just like, listen, there's no chance I would invest in this. It seems like terrible. And I was just like, wow, like, thank you so much. Cause I was just so exhausted, and like, it really stung for a second. And then I was like, wow, this guy is like being real with me. The crazy thing he ended up investing, and like in that round, and so it would, something turned it around. I mean, this is like, over a decade ago, but, I do. Yeah, awesome. It's memorable. No,
but I think that's great. And it's a sign that even if it's a little painful, like, as you know, I'm quite blunt. Everybody thinks they like directness, but then when you actually get it, sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. Totally. And I had a situation where the founder did that to me, and it was really horrifying. And I think I felt like I'd fucked it up, where I had to take a meeting with these founders because they were basically a family member of somebody who had introduced. And I kind of said like, hey, I don't understand what you're working on. And they had said, they worked at a famously secretive big company, which I'm not going to mention because I want to protect their privacy. And I was like, okay, like maybe I'll give them a buy for not telling me what they're doing because of that. And then we finally get to the meeting, and then they start telling me what they're doing. And it is completely incoherent to me. Like I literally don't understand what they're doing. And then I said, okay, who is the customer for this? And they're like, well, the CEO of a company with several hundred employees. I was like, oh, like me in my last job. And this was like a year or two into being CEO. They're like, yes, me. And I said to them, the honest truth, which is, if you had been pitching me as the CEO right now, I would have asked you to leave my office because I don't understand what you're selling. And that was probably a needlessly horrible way to put it. Although that is what I would have done. And one of the founders left, went to the bathroom or something, came back, shook my hand. He said, good day, sir. It's very clear you don't like this business. I was like, okay, something's weird. Sit down. I must have mishandled it. And I apologized to him, but meeting ended 5 minutes later. And you know what? I think their time was better spent elsewhere.
Wow.
Yeah.
I admire it.
Yeah. I admire the guy's courage for saying it for sure.
Okay. Another question. Big one. VC, being a successful VC, do you think it's more about like deciding what to invest in, or hustling to get an investment, or negotiating well? Or is it some fourth thing that I can't think of?
I don't know. And the reason I don't know is because while we have invested in several companies that are magnificent, and I'm really proud, 7 companies that have performed in terms of like value magnificently, and our funds as a whole perform like really well. And I really value how we serve founders because, NPS is our metric. I don't think you can say in 8 years that you have been a successful VC. I think you need a consistent track record of backing, and sometimes these are multi-decade relationships, the very best founders in the world. That said, I can give you, and like the thing I say about how VC is as a game is, if you think of a VC as a game, it's like baseball, and Bill Gurley has this line that it's like I think it's Bill Gurley, that it's a game of grand slams, not of home runs. I actually think it's even worse than that. it is a game where your success is measured by the tape measure distance of your single longest home run, meaning like it's your best hit ever. And by the way, the balls are in the air for 9 to 11 years. And, you know, like who knows when they're going to land. So who knows? All right. How do you know? So you have some leading indicators, but my hypothesis is that it varies a ton depending on the stage you're at. So if I'm a late stage investor, picking and pricing correctly are probably the most important things, because like knowing which companies are out there, the universe is knowable. Hello, Adam Bain. If I'm the earliest stage investor like us, our biggest misses are what we call dark deal flow, is some company that went straight to an investor that had a pre-existing relationship. We never heard about them. And so we never saw. And there are thousands of those all the time, and they make me paranoid. So there are many more misses like that than there were the more psychologically painful misses, which you therefore tend to focus on, of I had a chance to invest in this. It was great. And I blew it, which has happened a handful of times for sure. And those sting, but they're less of an issue than the ones you never see.
Interesting.
Yeah. And by the way, my root belief is serve founders well, very well, and everything else will follow. Because if you serve founders well, like when I was a founder, how did I pick which investor to work with? I asked other founders who worked with them. So if you serve founders well, you're more likely to win. How do you, see deals? Oftentimes from founders who you have invested in. And so serving founders well, to me, both it's just what I like. Like I run a customer success business that sells money to founders. And I think strategically, it also helps you with all the other parts of the funnel. Start at the back of the funnel. It's kind of classic advice.
Okay, you might not be able to answer this one, but it's kind of in the same vein. I think VCs are trying to sell to founders for sure. I mean, also trying to buy from founders, but
sure.
Okay,
totally. 100%.
So why are VCs so annoying on Twitter?
Oh my God. Well,
it seems like a bad plan, doesn't it?
Here's a funny thing about startups. So I'm going to count myself for a moment as one of these annoying VCs, because a good friend of mine who is a neuroscientist, hi Bobby, said to me, he's like, I really like what you say on Twitter, except when you talk about founders and companies. And why the fuck do you do that? It's so annoying. And the reason I do it is because I'm really proud of the companies we invest in. And I want to share their success with others and share with others the fact that we work with that company. So of course, and I talked about this in the context of VC Brags a few days ago, that Twitter account. And so here's the reason why, I think, is in startups, and VC is just another startup business model. It's an outlier business model. It's just another startup type of business. It's not the same in lots of ways. It's way easier, but it's the same in that way. The things that are amazing and the things that are horrible are much more similar to each other than the things that are amazing and the things that are mediocre. Meaning, I could be an amazing VC producing lots of useful content, drawing founders to work with me, creating controversy, or I could be a VC who really sucks. And those two could look identical to each other on Twitter, because one of them might be annoying, or by the way, even worse, one of them might be super annoying to some people. And, like all the tech libertarian productivity boys, they annoy the shit out of me. But like there are founders who are like, yeah, man, I did my 4-day intermittent fast, and now I'm going to go raise 10 on a 12, I'm going to go just 2 on a 12 cap and go to YC. It's like, kill me now. I want people who think for themselves. But the people who don't speak, some of them are also quite amazing. I mean, they're great investors who you'll never see anywhere in social media or on Twitter, but many of them just don't have anything to say, and they're just mediocre. So I think that's why VC Twitter is so annoying, is because you got lots of near misses to greatness that turns out to be fucking awful.
These are great.
Other theories.
All right, well, I think Min is telling us to wrap up, but if you invite me back, so let's go.
We got fewer people in here. We still got 21 souls or something like that listening to us. So Min, while I appreciate your hook, and you do have ultimate admin power, Lucas, keep hitting me.
Oh, all right.
Thank you, Min.
All right, let's move to my HR questions then.
HR questions. Yeah, we have the whole second category.
I got a whole other category of questions.
Another day.
Okay. What do you think about this? Do you think that hiring decisions should be unanimous?
Depends. It depends on the cost of being wrong. So hiring decisions for the 9th person to join your 90-person sales team, I really don't see much point in unanimity for that, because people come in and out. On the Bloomberg beta team, hiring is unanimous. There's always a decision maker, but all of us has to be at least enthusiastic about the person. And so we're hiring for a role now. Karen is the decision maker. all of us who meet the person have to be enthusiastic because it's such a small team. It's so integrated. If one person ends up being bad or one person's just not excited to work with a person, then it just doesn't work. Now that can create lots of other issues because unanimity may make for a more uniform pool of people who everybody likes, least common denominator. So you have to compensate for that by talking a lot about how the diversity of perspectives that you want, blah, blah, blah. So I don't think there's a right answer to unanimity. And I think the principle is it turns on what is the cost of being wrong.
Okay. If you, and I'm sure you've experienced this, I think everyone who's managed people has experienced this. When you get to the point where someone is like bad enough that you're like almost positive that you're going to let them go, should you put them on a performance plan to kind of give them some warning?
It depends. So yes, you should always give somebody some warning for sure, just because it's like a human thing to do. But in some contexts, that warning might be 6 hours because the person's work is so rapid fire and they're making errors at such a pace that they could ruin your entire company in 6 hours. So how long you give them, I think, first of all, I think most people give way too long because most people can't fix those issues. Or by the time they have the issues, they then end up metastasizing as other issues around the team. Like somebody becomes angry at the person for the 2 months when they didn't show up on time. And like, yeah, they could start showing up on time, but that's not going to fix their anger about it. So there's like all kinds of issues like that. In general, I think people use performance improvement plans and keep people on for too long. I think most startups are actually really good at it, which is give the person a fair chance to address it, take into account their life circumstances. Like, if somebody's a parent of 2 kids and this is their only job, I hate to say it, but I do think about it a little bit differently in terms of how far in advance I want to communicate with them. And yeah. What do you think? You do it.
I feel pretty strongly that if I'm sure that I want to let someone go, that I just tell them that. But I found that's controversial in the companies that I run. And I think oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Of how quickly you come to your own mind. Like if you're a person who doesn't have any thoughts like that, and then one day you're certain all of a sudden, I think that's different for a CEO like that. And by the way, I think firing is a more important CEO skill than hiring. And we spend 10 times more time talking about hiring. Even the best people I know at hiring are right like 2/3 of the time, something like that. And so, obviously then it's going to be better to get your higher leverage skill is to be better at firing people. So, I buy that. And for me, it's like before I think somebody's not going to work out, I start having thoughts like, gosh, that's really no good. And so a performance improvement plan, by the way, it doesn't mean you are about to get fired. Here are the 3 issues you must address. It can mean that. For me, it's just like, I live in a high feedback world where like, hey, that thing you messed up, that really caused a bad consequence. And so if somebody is surprised, we haven't done our jobs, but feedback is a version of that warning is I guess what I'm trying to say.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
All right, keep going.
All right. Should you be transparent about salaries?
Ooh, all right. And we are losing people, so we're going to go quick on these.
All right,
to be transparent on salaries is a question that you can only answer in the context of a broader ethos about the company. Netflix pays people top of market because they have this whole system of values that goes around that. Buffer is transparent about salaries because they have a whole system of values that goes around that. And so I think you can't answer that question in isolation. All other things being equal, is it better to be transparent? Yes. All other things, in my opinion. But, I've tried to introduce it early on and some people were resistant. And so I was like, okay, it's not worth the price of that intense pain and discomfort for people on the team because transparency is hard. It is work. It is painful work. Every single time we publish something new on our GitHub, we publish that average valuations. We had a whole discussion team of like, is that going to cause a backfire? Blah, 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 blah. So transparency is hard. Yes, I think it's better, but I only think it makes sense as part of a system.
Okay, a final question. So what do you do when, I'm sure this has happened to you, when you have like a more junior employee that comes to you and they have critical feedback about a more senior employee, and they also ask you to not share it with the more senior employee? How do you handle that situation?
It depends on your relative role. So let's say you're the CEO.
You're the boss of both.
Yeah, if you're the boss of both, then I think it's fine because it depends on the details, but let's assume it's not like they broke a law or something like that.
Right.
And what I would say is I treat it as input. Like, when you do a 180 review or a 360 review, you collect input from lots of people and you synthesize it and present it to the person as their manager. It's kind of like a one-off instance of that. They've given you a little feedback, but in every single one of those cases, what I try to do is encourage the person to go deliver the feedback themselves and talk through how to do it and blah, blah, blah. Because I want that person to know, but I don't want them I don't want them to feel like I'm a conduit. I also don't want to train the person who works for me to use the CEO as a conduit for the delivery of feedback. So that's how I do that. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's the right way. I'd be curious if other people, chat, comments, whatever, have the right way.
Okay, fine. Let me ask. Can I ask one more? Let me just get one more.
We have more people now.
All right. What do you do when you feel like someone that works for you is kind of being dishonest with you, but you can't prove it?
Fire them immediately.
With no warning or 6
No. Tell them, I suspect, like one of the most hurtful things I have said to people in the workplace, but like you got to own your side of the street, is I'll say, I don't believe you when somebody says something. And they'll say, why? And I'll say, well, sometimes you can articulate it, sometimes you can. And usually at that point, it's so fatal that they want to go. But I think if you can't trust somebody you work with as the CEO, that is, look, at first you got to do some self-examination of why is that? It's because they remind me of my mother and my mother once lied to me and like blah, blah, blah. Okay, let's assume you've dealt with that stuff. Mm-hmm. At some point, it isn't about good or bad or right or wrong. It's just about fit. And if you do not trust somebody, then fit is a big issue.
Wow, Roy, great job. Not even thinking about these questions, just coming in with.
Well, yeah, do I hire the experienced person or the person I connect with? It depends. Actually, I think instead of calling this series "This Is Not Advice," maybe I should reword it and call it "It Depends," because really that is the answer to basically all of these questions. You asked about like what big company processes when you texted me, should I introduce at startups? I did a whole presentation. It depends. Introduce them slowly, just when you need them, whatever. Anyway, but I would like to do this more. And as you have more questions and blah blah blah. Oh, here's my one for you. If I am a semi-technical person, I've done like low and no code stuff. I've like built some websites. And I do side projects, and I'm thinking one day about starting a company, and I feel like I need familiarity. How do I know if I need familiarity with AI tools and models in order to start a company? Like, how do I know the problem that it solves for me? And if I think it's something I want to do, how do I start to learn?
Well, that's a good advertisement for my YouTube channel, which you should absolutely check out.
It was kind of intended, but I also genuinely would like the answer to this question.
Well, first of all, my view on if you're a non-technical person, I think that the little bits that you learn that are technical really, really help you. Like, I actually think it's like, I think people feel kind of, they don't know where to start or they feel kind of bad about it. I actually watched this with my wife, who's not a technical person, but, she runs a very successful company. I think one of the keys to her success was actually, she spent a weekend and just learned how to write code in JavaScript. And it really helped her. Like, I mean, in all these unexpected ways. And so
I think I'm hearing you say err on the side of learning a little, no matter what.
Learn a little.
Yeah, I totally buy that. And so how would you start to do that? Because like, for example, I tried some of the online machine learning classes, and they were so theory. And like, I took stats in grad school. So like, I know what a linear regression is and a logistic regression, and I know how to think statistically, but didn't get me any closer to how do I make this useful for myself as a CEO.
Well, I do feel proud of my YouTube videos, so you should definitely post a link to them and check them out.
YouTube.
So this is the Weights and Biases YouTube channel where we actually want people like you to we want to make it possible for everyone to really learn how to do this in a very hands-on, practical way. So I would strongly recommend it.
Oopsie, I literally just opened the page to subscribe to it. Okay. I think that's a great one. Okay, that's a place where we'll start. Maybe we'll post a link to that on ye old Twitter or LinkedIn or such. And Lucas, you have shattered the record for the longest one, which means people have had 33 minutes to think. Roy is nice and Lucas is very smart, but where is Min? Really, where is Min?
Where is Min? I wonder what Min thinks about these things too.
I know. Min can chime in with us later. All right, we're gonna jump off. Thank you, Lucas. Godspeed.
Take care.